Welcome to Table Talk, a place to gather, guide, and go.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Table Talk. We're so excited that you decided to pull up a seat and share in this feast that we're going to have at our table. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Alyssa DeLosSantos. And today we're going to continue our season talk about community and having a seat at the table. Gave it away there. Having a seat at the table. And last month we talked about transformation and what happens when we can't serve others because we're not being served. And we talked a lot about being a broken cistern. And so really that led us into the conversation for this month about community. And that's where we have to rely on that community, whether they're having a seat at our table actively, or if maybe they're just a pop-in guest from time to time. And we were talking during our pre-production meeting, Alyssa and I, about this saying that's now so popular. And I know, Alyssa, you admitted to having a t-shirt on it of "It's fine, I'm fine, everything's fine." And, that's something that we are taught, especially as women, and moms, that we have to put this front up and not reach out for help, or we're not taught how to ask for help when we need it, or even recognize when we need help. And we were talking a little bit too about that, actually recognizing it first and then reaching out. And I know, Alyssa, you have a little bit of a history point of view to share with our viewers about that.
I do, actually. And the other thing I would say in relation to what you were saying about not knowing how to necessarily even identify our need for help, I think that's really, really powerful in the sense of there's another layer to that even if we do ask for help or imply that we need help, I don't know that we always accept help, right? From the pull yourself up from your bootstraps. We have a long history with sayings like that, right? Forge your own path. We have these things that we say, and they very subtly remind us that really we shouldn't need help. And I think we've lived enough life, right, Jill? We've lived enough life to say, no, in fact, we actually do need help. And it is the power of community where we receive that help. We can receive that help. Well, there's a story you may have heard of about the SS Fitzgerald. And that was the SS Fitzgerald was an American Great Lakes freighter. And it went out one time out on the sea and a severe storm blew in. In fact, it's recorded that there were waves reaching as high as 35 feet high with hurricane force winds. Not really a place I'm looking to spend vacation. And what's interesting is that during this little episode, an article I read says that while they were trying to maintain position and continue the journey amid these terrible conditions, the ship sustained damage as it got too close to an island. And so the captain of the SS Fitzgerald radios to the captain of the SS Anderson, which was a nearby ship, to tell him of his damage. And get this, the captain of the SS Fitzgerald asked the captain of the SS Anderson to stay close. Okay, that seems reasonable. But as the storm continued, the SS Fitzgerald took on two huge waves that really kind of sent it into a situation that moved from bad to worse. And it had no more radars. Okay, so now here's this ship in this middle of this huge storm, no radars. Okay, that's kind of a treacherous place for a ship to find itself. And during one exchange, it's noted that the captain of the Anderson asked how the Fitzgerald was doing with their problem. Okay, traveling, damaged, no radars. The response from the captain of the SS Fitzgerald is a little haunting. He says this: "We're holding our own." And that was the final interaction between the two captains. Some 10 to 15 minutes later, the SS Fitzgerald and its crew of 29 sank in Lake Superior. And though the captain had originally reported the trouble, right, obviously, No distress signal was sent out before the ship sank. We're holding our own. You see, I think the reality is what we've learned is to hold our own. And when we hold our own, even though people are close, like the SS Anderson, people are close, but they're not involved. No distress signal was sent out. This ship was about to sink. That's irreversible. And sometimes I think, Jill, what happens is there's a table and it's really close to us. And we've been invited many times into community, but we think we're holding our own, right? The key word is think. And sometimes we're about to go down and we don't even know who to send our distress signal out to. And it's haunting. It's haunting to think that there were people close enough that could have helped in this situation. And there are people that are close enough in our lives who want to be involved, not who want to rescue us, but who want to walk with us, who want to journey with us, who are interested in our problems, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this concept of us holding our own causes us to just move into isolation.
Yes.
And I have been guilty many times of being in a situation where I really, really needed someone. And as you mentioned, I didn't know how to, it's vulnerable to confess your need.
Mm.
And my option is either to send out the signal, yeah, or to sink. I've done both. I've done both. And now after having done both, I think I want to always send out this signal. And I have had plenty of opportunities, right? Where I have either been paralyzed by fear or paralyzed by what appears to be in front of me, the danger that appears to be in front of me. But I asked one time, I had a situation where there were some family things that weren't going well, some deeply distressing family things happening in my life. And I had a couple friends and I was texting with them and I just said, I'm not good. And that was a cry for help. That was a distress signal. And something that I don't do well is to follow that up. And so one of the friends sent a text back and said, do we need to come? And I said, yes. Rarely will I say yes. And I said yes. And something that has never happened in my life before is they literally got in the car and came to my house. And I happened to have just gotten out of the shower and I heard a knock on my bathroom door and it was them. And something that I've literally never done in my life was to invite someone into my bathroom while I'm in my bathrobe. And we sat there and we cried together and they held me and they encouraged me. And there was no shame in that moment. And I wish I could tell you that that was the only time where that's happened. But when I walked through a painful divorce, I had people who showed up because I didn't know what to pray. In fact, Jill, I didn't have any words at all. And they would show up, they would come to my house and pray over me. And I would weep. I'd say nothing at all. Or the time I got home from taking my kids to the movie, and there was the sweetest gentleman mowing my lawn, not because I asked in that situation, but because I was in enough community that he was perceptive to know my need. There are times where community sustained me, community carried me. When I couldn't speak, when I couldn't walk, when I didn't have a thing to contribute. In those moments, there were people close enough. I could call for help and they were ready to be there.
And it's so interesting that you bring that up because I am the type of person where I love to serve others. It's why I do what I do. And I'm the first to say, oh, you know what? I know so-and-so is having a hard time. Let me just, get over there, do some pruning of the bushes or bring a casserole or something like that. I'm that person. But when it comes to myself, ooh, that's always hard. Like that asking part personally for me, has always and continues to be something I have to work on. So for me, I have an example of, I think it was just about 4 years ago now. I was out of work. I didn't know what my next step was going to be. I isolated myself totally from my friends, from my spouse, from my family. I was isolating myself from God's word, and I would just sit in my own head. And like days would go by, and I'm like, my husband would come home and be like, "Oh, what'd you do today?" And I'm like, um, nothing really, And finally, my youngest sister called me up one day and said, we talk regularly, my sister Denise and I, regularly. She called me up and she goes, "I haven't talked to you in like 2 weeks. What's going on?" And I'm like, "I feel like I'm in this pit and I don't know how to get out." And she's like, "Okay, I've been there. Let's figure this out. And what are you feeling?" And like she started talking me through what I couldn't put words to.
Right.
And then she essentially just said, "You need to go see your medical doctor. You really do, Jill, because this is really starting to sound like it may be temporary, but it's starting to sound like you're in a depression." And she goes, "And for you to pull yourself away from the Bible plans that we were doing, from, posting a scripture and all of that, that was the warning flag to her. And she knew that that wasn't me. And then that removal of contact. And so it took her reaching out where, I ended up going on meds for a little while, and thankfully it worked, and I've now grown stronger. But it took her seeing the warning signs that I was putting up without putting them up, if you know what I mean, to say there's something going on here. And I know you're strong and I know you don't want to ask for it, but I'm going to give it to you anyway.
Yeah. But you know what, Jill, that only happened because at some point you made yourself vulnerable to be known. And I realize someone might say, well, that's, Jill's sister. Of course she would know. That's not necessarily true. Sometimes the people closest to us don't really know us, but you had made yourself known, and that's really matters when it comes to community. Because we can't always be the outward, we can't always be the one giving, right? There is a posture of also receiving. And I have had this situation where there's a person in my life, and I will go to great lengths and make a meal, and it seems like this person is never hungry, literally, when I'm ready to serve. And that can feel curious to me, right? Like, I'm wanting to serve you. Will you let me serve you? And it's that thing where it is this give and take. We have to serve, we have to give, and we have to also receive. And there's vulnerability in that, right?
Yes. But there's something beautiful that comes out of that vulnerability. And I've learned that over these past up to 4 years now, and still continue to learn that. It's like, okay, God, that's the first person I lean into. That's the first thing I run to now is the word. And okay, God, prayer, what do you want me to learn from this? What am I standing in the hallway? Am I walking through a door? What am I doing here? And I've learned that's a muscle that we have to work. And it also gives us the strength to that when we are struggling to not only acknowledge, but then ask for that help.
And then accept the help.
Yes, exactly. Accept it. And that makes me think of the parable of the paralytic man. And I want to read directly from my Bible, if you don't mind, because I'm going to Luke chapter 5, because I love his telling of this. And I'm starting in verse 17. And it says, "On one of those days while he was teaching, Pharisees and teachers of the law were sitting there, who had come from every village of Galilee and Judea, and also from Jerusalem. And the Lord's power to heal was in him. Just then, some men carrying on a stretcher a man who was paralyzed. They tried to bring him in and set him down before Jesus. Since they could not find a way to bring their friend in because of the crowd, they went up to the roof and lowered him on the stretcher through the roof tiles into the middle of the crowd before Jesus. Seeing their faith, Jesus said, "Friends, your sins are forgiven." And then the scribes and the Pharisees began to think to themselves, "Who is this man who speaks blasphemies? Who can forgive sins but God alone?" But perceiving their thoughts, Jesus replied to them, "What are you thinking in this of your hearts? Which is easier to say, 'You are forgiven,' or say, 'Get up and walk'? But so that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins," he also told the paralyzed man, "I tell you, get up your stretcher and go home." Immediately he got up before them, picked up what he had lying on, and went home glorifying God. So there's so much that we can unpack in that, but I really want to talk about, as we're talking about this sense of community, like you have this man who has no other choice but to accept help because he can't on his own. And now you have his friends who are so determined and love him so much that they climb up on a roof that they now have to peel layers back on. So the roofs of this time were very flat because they were used for various things. And they had layers of hard packed clay, straw, hard packed clay, straw. They were usually about 6 to 8 layers deep, from what I was reading. And so these men then had to pull all of these layers back in a large enough space so that they could lower this man and then have that strength to bring him in front of the one who not only forgave, but then healed. That's just so powerful to me about that sense of community. And as we move into discussing that acceptance of help.
Right. Also, just a couple of thoughts that come to my mind about this story is that, you know what, how many times have we been in a position where, okay, it's too crowded and we don't go to plan B? We're just like, well, we tried to help someone and it didn't work the way we thought. I couldn't get through the door, so I went home. And they're like, we can't get through the door, so let's create another door. And then think about the tension, maybe even in the room of, Jill, what if they did that and the Messiah couldn't heal, or the Messiah decided not to heal? What if you're the homeowner and you're like, hey, y'all, there's a hole in my roof, right? And we didn't get to see a miracle. And so how are we going to handle that? There could have been a lot of tension in that moment, but community carries us. Community carried him. A faith among friends is enough to push through obstacles. A faith among friends is enough to carry a heavy burden before the Lord. A faith among friends is enough to look for another way when the obvious way doesn't work. That's the kind of power of community, not just to carry him physically, but to literally, by faith, carry him before the Father. This is what my friends were doing for me. And in this season, when I was walking through a painful divorce and I couldn't pray for myself, I couldn't study for myself, they carried me to the Father. This is where healing happens. This is where forgiveness happens. This is where we lean into someone else, what they believe in the moments where we can't believe. And I've said before, like, borrowed hope is still hope, but you know what? Borrowed faith is also still faith. And that is the power of the table. That is the power of coming together right there. I love that it, when you read it, specifically said, when Jesus saw their faith. Do you love that? Because that is the power of community. That sometimes the community can believe enough for the one who is weak, enough for the one who is troubled, and it's enough for the Father to catch the Father's attention. You might think, oh, his injury, the fact that he was lying on a mat, whatever, his wounding, whatever that was, or whatever that becomes for us, that would be enough to catch the Father's attention, but he was more moved by the faith of the friends. Again, a good argument for gathering at the table, a good argument for creating and being in community. I love that their faith was visible, don't you?
I do.
And I want,
Go ahead.
it just makes me pause to think, is my faith visible? Because I want it to be. For the sake of myself, my family, my friends, is it visible?
Yeah, and this is something too that we also talked about that in the past, on past episodes, is that the man doesn't have a name. And how many times can we insert ourselves in that? Like, I think about myself being paralyzed by depression. How many times, you even said it yourself, paralyzed by fear.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and the one thing that we are called to do is to love one another.
Yeah.
And that is showing and being an extension of our faith when we truly do that, or when we truly accept it for ourselves.
Right. You know, it's interesting, the things we don't read in scripture, right? But the things that we like to think about, like, was there a fight? Was he like, hey guys, no, that's going to be awkward. I don't want to be lowered through the roof. I don't want healing that much. See, because we think so much about image when it comes to our need and the asking for help, accepting help. It's so image based, right? We don't want to appear a particular way. And yet the contrast to that is everything in this story that Jesus saw their faith. That's a visual, right? He could visually see their faith. That is in some ways an image, right? And I mean, can you imagine the image of him being lowered through the roof? I mean, talk about Jesus in the middle of teaching. There were great crowds. I mean, the religious leaders were trying to catch him, already kind of listening for how they might accuse him. And talk about not wanting to be the center of attention, and all of a sudden, all eyes are on you. But I think that very thing is what keeps us from accepting help. I don't want people to see what's going on. And the reality is, don't you love that Jesus didn't say, hey, tell me about your life and why you're paralyzed and how that happened and how's life been for you? See, we think that's what we think when we ask for help, when we first of all acknowledge our need and then ask for help, that accepting the help means that we're going to have to just lay it all out there. But I think this is such a good picture that that's not true. When we acknowledge our need, he knew his need when he asked for help. Now, whether he asked them or not, we don't know. But at some point, he probably did ask for some help of some sort. And then accepting the help to be able to just lean into that. I don't have to share everything that got me to this point. But there's a humility, there's that vulnerability in this process of community. I love it because
it's the humbling.
It is.
We've talked about that, and we're told that humbly come to the cross, humbly bring yourself and your burdens and your prayers, your wants, your desires, like humbly bring it all. And that humility is powerful. It's hard.
Yeah. It's very difficult. I would say almost next to impossible. Community helps us push through, though, what may otherwise cause us to quit. So think about that back to this story, right? So it may cause us to quit when we can't see the way. Anyone know what I'm talking about? Yes. But community, because the friends were there, who knows? Maybe the paralytic man was like, hey, let's just go home. It's too busy. It's too crowded in here. Whatever. We can't get in. But the power of community says, we're going to push through that obstacle. You can't see it, but we are going to see it. When I want to shrink back, which is routine for me, when I want to fly under the radar, if I am in isolation, I can do that. If I am am in effective community, someone in that community, like your sister, will say to me, "What's going on?
Mm.
You're being a wallflower. Why are you being a wallflower? Why have you silenced your voice?" But the power of community, their encouragement is what pushes me forward. Their encouragement is what says, go ahead, keep being you. You know, the world needs what you have. Go ahead, come on, right?
Yes.
Without them, without that community, we can just shrink away. We can hold our own,
Mm.
right? Which I think is really, really dangerous.
Yeah, and I know we were talking a little bit about the acceptance of that and the community of that. And it reminds me of when we were talking, you mentioned the Himba women, I believe it
Yeah.
is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. This is really awesome. So in the introduction to Joe Saxton's book, The Dream of You, Anne Boskamp actually wrote the introduction, and she was sharing about this story that actually beautifully illustrates the purpose and power of gathering in community. And this is what she said. There's a brilliant family of people in Africa called the Himba. When a Himba woman is expecting a child, she goes out into the wilderness with a few of her sisters, and together they wait until they hear in their hearts the song of the coming child. But there's another occasion upon which the Himba sing. If at any time during her life the sister loses her way, falls short, forgets who she really is, or lets anything steal the dream of who she is meant to be, she is gently beckoned to the center of the village. And there she stands, her people forming a safe, ringing circle around her. Then the villagers sing, letting the beat of her drum, the rhythm of her own, being awakened in her to the dream of her soul again. They sing her own song to her because Himba sisters believe that change happens most when we remember who we are and whose we are. What I love about that story is that they knew her song,
Mm.
and they couldn't sing her song back to her if they didn't know her song. And the question becomes, who is encircling us? Who knows our song in order to sing it back to us in those moments where we've lost our way or we've grown weak and discouraged? Who's doing that for us? This is the power of community. This is the power of acknowledging the need we have and asking for help and accepting the help. And sometimes the help, Jill, is simply a conversation,
Yeah.
a coming alongside of some sorts. You know, here's another thing I want to tell you about that. There's a twofold power to me that both in this story of the Himba and in the story of the paralytic man, there are two prongs here to the healing. One is very personal and one is very public. And I think when we are in community, there are things that happen that are deeply personal. There are things that we can't articulate that happen when someone sings our song back to us or when we are healed and forgiven by the Father. But there's also something very public, because when I'm in community, if I witness, if I circle around a sister or a friend who's lost their way, and I have the ability to be a part of the voice that calls them back into being, there's something that happens to everyone in that circle, not just the one in the middle. There's a magnitude of power that ripples through those who get to witness what happens to the single soul. And I think that's always true in miracles. That's so very often true that there's the person that's healed, but then there are the people who are watching. Think about that. Think about how the healing of one within a circle bolsters the faith of everyone else in the circle.
Yeah, and it reassures them also, because I know myself, when I'm part of that circle, it reassures me that okay, when I have troubles, not if, when,
Preach.
that I can rely on this community to circle around me.
Mm.
And there's a reason why in American history we're taught the circling of the wagons for protection. It's the same thing, and
Mhm.
that the ripple always for me is to say, yes, here's something else that you can trust. Here's the community that you can rely on to circle around you and know the beat of your song and be able to sing it
Right.
back to you. Like, I think of your friends knocking on your bathroom door. That's exactly what they were doing.
Weren't they?
Yeah.
But you know what? I could have easily said, hey, hold on, let me get dressed. Let me, this or that.
Yeah.
Because that's what we do. We throw out we see the obstacles, like the can't get through the front door because the house is crowded where Jesus is. And we say, maybe later, right? And any time we delay obedience, it's disobedience. It just is. And there is power in this, yes, in saying, come in now. The help I need is right now. Right? I'm going to accept it in this moment, not when I can put my makeup on or put the right words together to articulate my need. Sometimes our need comes in moans.
Mm. So good.
Right? The other thing that I wanted to tell you was that wanted to say was that when I can't believe, and there are many, listen, I go in and out of seasons where I just struggle to believe. And when I can't, if I will confess that in my community, the great thing is, again, they carry me. They don't condemn me, right? No one needs to fix me when I can't believe. What they do is they carry me, right? Because they know it won't last long. Well, sometimes it has lasted longer than I would like. However, my point is it's not eternal necessarily. I had that happen as a child where people carried me. I had it happen in my divorce. I had it happen when I had to leave a church I had been a part of for a long time and wasn't sure anymore. Like, what did I believe? What was my value? What was my gift? What do I bring to the table? I had lost my way. And I needed those people who would be willing to remind me who I am and whose I am. I needed them. I needed them desperately, but I had to say I needed them. And that, I think, is our our biggest issue. But when we do confess and when we see movement by the Spirit, there is something that bonds us together in a way that cannot be broken. That's the power of community. That's the power of saying I need help. That's the power of acknowledging the need, asking for help, and accepting the help as a final step.
So good. I just thought I'm thinking because we've been talking all about community and like, how do we define what community is? And for me, something you said that I have to repeat because it's powerful. And if you don't take anything else away from this, community is the people who are going to circle you and are going to carry you, not condemn.
Yeah.
Man.
Right. Which is, I think, actually that last part, the condemnation, is what keeps so many of us from community. I think we're so afraid of condemnation because we've experienced it, right? I've given it.
Oh,
I regret that terribly, but I've been a voice among the condemners. And so if we don't adjust that, if we don't make the adjustment, if we don't believe and have faith that it could be different, we'll never experience anything different, right? Because isolation will always lead to loneliness and fear. I mean, that's just what happens there. I was thinking too, Lisa Turker says, you steer where you stare. And in thinking about this and the power of community, I even think about it as a whole. Like, as a whole, where is the community that you're in? What are they staring at? What are they looking toward? Right? Because wherever we're staring, we're going to steer. I know that's true. I know it's true because I just got off a long road trip, and when my husband was looking at a billboard, we went toward the billboard. Right? And so I know it's true that happens for us. Where we fix our gaze is where we will steer. And so it's important that our community, Jill, be healthy, and that there be powerful purpose in the community, in order for these men to carry the paralytic to Jesus, they had to believe Jesus was able.
Yes.
And I think that's important to know. Do you have a community where there is enough faith that Jesus could see the faith of the people in the community when you're struggling to believe? That the community itself is staring toward Jesus, toward kingdom. That's really important.
Yeah. So important. It's like going to church with you every time, Alyssa.
I know. I love that, Jill. I'm always moved. I'm moved to be a better version of myself. Again, that's a testimony to community.
Exactly. Yes. Yes. And every month I take something new away. And that's also testimony. Oh, goodness. So good. So good.
Yeah.
And, really quick, I just want to leave with the fact that that fear of condemnation is what prevents us from asking and then accepting the help. Because we can acknowledge that, yes, I'm struggling. But if we keep that internally, then, us reaching out, then our community is not going to be able to carry us. And,
So
like you, I've been on both ends. And I regret it horribly. I was part of the condemnation crowd. Now I'm just, no way. I'm part of the carry crowd. How can I help and what can I do? And that's the strength of community. And that's the strength of walking in faith.
So true. And so I think that's a powerful transition too, to think about this month. To be reflective, where does our community carry us? Does it carry us toward fads and things that fade, or does our community carry us toward faith? And where are we carrying others? I think that's important for us to think about. And where have we set our gaze? We're gonna steer there. So where have we set our gaze? Where has our community, the community that we have, or the community that we desire, what does that look like? I think we've got to get real. And I think we should ask the question this month too, Jill. Will I acknowledge my need? Will I ask for help? But like what you just said, will I accept help? And where might I be needing that help right now? I think that's important. I think we need to be brave. I think we need to have courage to say in community, can you carry me? Can you carry me for a minute?
Yeah. And if that community turns to the condemnation, you need to find another community.
Yeah.
And that's not easy, but it is possible. It is very possible.
Absolutely.
We gave everybody a couple goes this month.
I know. I'm already contemplating, even as I sit here, nodding my head. I'm already thinking about the goodness of God.
Yeah. And even just how much our community has grown. I didn't even know you a year ago. And now look at this. Look at us. Sharing our faith, but also sharing in our vulnerability and sharing that, yes, this is a community where you will be carried.
Yes.
So important for somebody who may not have that.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, Alyssa, again, another great month.
Yes. Thank you, Jill. Such a good conversation.
Oh, thank you. All right, viewers, don't forget to hit the little subscribe button so that you never miss an episode of Table Talk. And if you feel so inclined, please share this episode with family and friends. We would be so blessed. And if you don't know where to reach out to community, or if you don't have a community, please reach out to us, because we would love to pull a seat up at our table and have you join our community. All right, until next time, God bless.